I still can't believe what happened when Karen, our neighborhood's self-appointed HOA president, decided to take my Amazon package. It wasn't just any package. It was something that, had she known its contents, would have made her think twice before touching it. But of course, Karen was too busy with her little HOA empire to consider the consequences. The day started like any other. The sun was bright, the birds chirped, and everything seemed perfectly peaceful. That was until I noticed the usual sign of Karen's petty behavior. She was standing by her driveway, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the neighborhood like a hawk. She'd been on this rampage lately, sending out violation notices left and right. And I could already sense that something was off today. My Amazon package had just been delivered, sitting there on my porch, the box clearly labeled, with a big, fragile sticker slapped across the side. I knew what was inside: my new camera gear for my photography hobby. I had been waiting for weeks for it to arrive, eager to start a new project. But it didn't take long for me to realize that I wasn't the only one who had noticed the package. Karen had been hovering around it for a while now, and with each passing second, I could see her growing more impatient. She had an uncanny knack for finding anything to complain about, especially when it involved my property. I had dealt with her enough times in the past to know her routine. Find something to accuse me of, send me a violation notice, and then try to intimidate me into following her petty rules. Today, she had already sent me 3 warnings for the smallest things, like the fact that a single leaf had blown in her precious yard and that my fence needed repainting because the HOA's color palette was too outdated. Ridiculous, right? I decided to go inside, trying to ignore her presence as I knew she'd be watching. I had no doubt that she was sizing up the box, wondering how she could use it against me in her little war for control of the neighborhood. But I wasn't going to let her win this time. I had a plan. The package was an unusual one. I had ordered it with the sole purpose of starting a small honeybee colony for my garden. It was an educational project, something to help with pollination and to support the environment. I had spent months researching it, and it wasn't just a simple order. The box was filled with honeybees, and they were in a delicate state, ready to be safely introduced into my garden. But Karen didn't know any of that. She just saw a box, probably imagining it was some frivolous Amazon purchase. As I turned to walk back into my house, I could see Karen from the corner of my eye, strutting up my driveway like she owned it. I knew exactly what she was about to do. Her hand hovered over the box, her lips curling into the kind of smile I knew too well, the one that meant she was about to make a move. And sure enough, before I could stop her, she snatched it. She didn't even bother to ring the doorbell or check if I was home. Just like that, she was walking off with it, her head held high as if she'd just scored a victory. I froze for a moment, disbelief washing over me. But then I realized this wasn't the time for hesitation. Karen had crossed the line. What she didn't know, and what I had no intention of explaining to her, was that this package was far from ordinary. Inside, my bees were waiting to be settled into their new home, and without the proper care and setup, they would die. And that was exactly what would happen if Karen didn't hand it back. I quickly grabbed my phone, knowing this was going to escalate. The video would serve as evidence, proof that Karen had taken something that wasn't hers, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I watched from the window as Karen strolled back to her house, the box still under her arm. My heart raced. I had no idea what she thought was in it, but if she opened it, she'd definitely regret it. And it wasn't going to be pretty. I decided to go after her, my steps hurried but careful. As I approached her front yard, I saw that she was already inside her house, the front door slightly ajar. My instincts told me to act fast. I didn't want to risk her opening the box and letting the bees escape. I knocked loudly on her door. No response. Then I tried again, and this time I heard movement inside. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, and there she was, standing in the doorway with that same smug expression she always wore. "Can I help you?" she asked, clearly feigning ignorance. I glanced down at the box she was holding. "Karen, give me my package back." My voice was calm, but I could feel the anger bubbling inside. She stared at me for a long moment, not saying a word. And then, finally, she spoke. "Oh, this? I thought I'd just bring it inside for you, since you weren't home. It looked like you were getting a lot of deliveries these days." She smiled in that way that made my blood boil. "That's very considerate of you," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "But it's my package. You took it off my porch without asking." "Well, I didn't want it to get stolen," Karen said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "And let's face it, we all know how much you like to get things delivered. It's not a good look." I couldn't believe the audacity. She wasn't even sorry. But the more I looked at the box, the more my anxiety grew. If I didn't get it back soon, those bees would start becoming agitated, and I wouldn't have a way to calm them down. And if they got loose, well, it wasn't just going to be a minor inconvenience. The last thing I needed was a whole swarm of angry bees in the neighborhood. I could already imagine Karen's face when she saw what was inside. The situation was escalating quickly, and I could feel my patience running thin. I knew I had to be careful, but the urgency of the situation pressed against me like a heavy weight. The last thing I wanted was for Karen to open the box and make things worse. She had no idea what she had just stolen, and I wasn't about to let her ruin it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself before pushing forward. I watched as she lingered by the door, clearly enjoying the control she thought she had over me. The package, however, wasn't something she could just brush off as a trivial matter. It was filled with live bees, and if she didn't act soon, it would be too late for them. I had to get it back, and I had to get it back now. I didn't waste another second. The moment she turned her back to me, I slipped around the side of her house, moving as quietly as I could. The layout of our neighborhood was simple, and Karen's house, with its well-manicured lawn and overly pristine facade, stood like a monument to her need for control. I knew exactly where she kept the package. It was on the table in her living room, positioned just inside the front window, clearly visible to anyone walking by. The bees were restless by now, buzzing fiercely inside their confined space, and I could only imagine the damage they would cause if they were allowed to break free. I couldn't afford to let that happen. As I approached her window, I could see the movement of her silhouette inside, pacing back and forth. The sound of her shoes tapping against the hardwood floor grew louder, and I knew she was up to something. Her obsession with controlling every aspect of the neighborhood had only grown worse over the years, and this was just another way for her to exert that power. She didn't see me crouched by the window, peering inside, but I knew I had to act fast. The bees were running out of time. Then I saw it, the moment she turned around, and in that instant the box was lifted off the table. She held it with both hands, inspecting it closely, her face twisting into a look of confusion. She probably thought it was some kind of prank or a random order that didn't belong to anyone. What she didn't realize was that inside that box were hundreds of angry, disoriented bees, their wings buzzing violently against the cardboard walls. The temperature inside was rising, and I could feel my heart race as I watched her move closer to the door. I couldn't let her open it. I had to stop her. Without thinking, I pushed open the small side gate that separated our yards, crossing over the low stone wall that divided our properties. I was just about to knock on her door again when I heard it, the unmistakable hum of the bees, louder now, as if they were making their move. Panic surged through me as I realized the bees had already started to escape. I could see tiny cracks in the box where they had begun to find their way out. My worst fear was coming true. I had to get the box back before they fully broke free, or else the entire neighborhood would be in danger. I rushed forward, knocking on her door with urgency. Karen opened it just a crack, her annoyed expression quickly turning to one of disbelief as she saw the look in my eyes. The bees were starting to swarm now, buzzing around her porch in a disorganized frenzy, and Karen, ever the drama queen, screamed, slamming the door behind her. Her face turned pale as she realized what was happening. I didn't have time to explain. I had to act. With a quick motion, I managed to grab the package from her doorstep. She tried to push me away, her hand gripping my arm in a tight, angry hold, but I wasn't about to let her stop me. I could feel the bees getting more agitated by the second, their buzz filling the air like a chaotic symphony. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, Karen was shouting something about calling the police, but I wasn't listening. All I could focus on was getting that box back to safety. I burst through my front door, slamming it shut behind me as I rushed to the kitchen. The bees were already starting to buzz around the living room, their tiny bodies zooming past my face, making my skin crawl. I set the box down on the table, taking a moment to steady myself. My hands shook from the adrenaline, but I knew I had no time to waste. I quickly grabbed the protective gear I had prepared earlier and began the process of moving the bees into their new hive. The room was filled with the frantic buzz of the bees, a sound that seemed to grow louder with each passing second. If I didn't get them into the hive now, the damage would be irreversible. As I worked quickly, I couldn't help but think about Karen. She had no idea the kind of trouble she had just stirred up. I had no plans to let her off easy. In fact, this was just the beginning. I knew I couldn't let her get away with this. She had crossed a line this time, and I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. What she didn't know was that I had already started gathering evidence, video footage, witnesses, and documentation of her past actions. Karen's reign of control over the neighborhood was coming to an end, whether she liked it or not. But as the last of the bees settled into their new home, I had a strange sense of satisfaction. The situation had been chaotic, but I had managed to get the bees back where they belonged. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. Karen had made the mistake of underestimating me, and I was ready to show her just how far she had pushed me. The bees weren't the only ones who had been disturbed in this ordeal. Karen's world was about to turn upside down, and I would be the one to make sure of it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how far-reaching Karen's influence had been. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was using her position to intimidate, threaten, and isolate those who dared to challenge her. I had heard rumors about how she'd made life miserable for others. Neighbors who had dared to paint their houses a different color. People who had tried to install solar panels or make minor modifications to their homes, only to be hit with enormous fines or threats of legal action. Her power had grown unchecked, and it was clear that she thought she was untouchable. But this time, she had messed with the wrong person. By the time the sun set, I had a clear plan in place. I would gather as many people as I could to confront Karen, exposing everything she had done to the neighborhood. The next day, I decided I would take action. The time for waiting was over. I couldn't just sit back and hope things would get better. I had to push forward, and I wasn't going to stop until Karen was held accountable. The bees had been the catalyst, but this was about more than just that one incident. It was about standing up to a bully who had been using her power for far too long. I went to bed that night with a sense of determination. The following morning would mark the beginning of the end for Karen's reign. I could already feel the weight of what was about to happen, but I knew it was the right thing to do. As the morning light crept through my window, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Today, everything was going to change. And when the doorbell rang, I wasn't the least bit surprised to see Karen standing there, her face a mask of feigned sweetness. The game had officially begun. I had no idea what she would throw at me next, but I was ready. The entire neighborhood was about to see her for who she really was, and that was going to be her biggest downfall. As I opened the door, Karen stood there, her perfectly polished facade still intact. She wore her usual smile, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes, as if trying to mask the storm of frustration brewing beneath. She wasted no time with pleasantries. Instead, she handed me a thick envelope, its contents likely a set of demands or threats. Her posture was stiff, her body language tight, as if she was preparing for something she knew would be uncomfortable. Her eyes flickered to the side, no doubt looking for the same package she had so boldly taken earlier. I could see the faintest flicker of realization cross her face as she remembered the bees. I wasn't sure what her next move would be, but I had a strong hunch that she had no idea what she was walking into. She began to speak, her voice smooth but laced with an edge of anger, clearly aimed at regaining control of a situation she thought she had firmly in her grip. The calm and measured tone of her words, however, couldn't mask the fury in her eyes. She was trying to take back the power she'd lost, but deep down, she knew it was slipping away. I had prepared myself for this moment, knowing full well she would try to deflect, intimidate, and manipulate, as she always did. But this time, the game had changed. It wasn't just me standing here anymore. I had a small army of neighbors behind me, and we were all ready to expose her for what she truly was. As Karen began talking about community standards and the supposed violation of HOA rules, I couldn't help but notice how she kept glancing over her shoulder as if she was waiting for something to happen. I knew she was used to having the upper hand, but she had no idea what was coming. I had already spoken with a few of the neighbors, and they were all just as fed up with her tactics as I was. They were ready to stand up, ready to speak out, and that would be her undoing. I held the envelope in my hands, but didn't open it. Instead, I placed it on the counter, where it sat as a reminder of how small her threats had become. This wasn't about documents or rules anymore. This was about power, and I was taking it back. I could see Karen's discomfort growing as she tried to maintain her composure. Her usual manipulative games weren't going to work on me this time. As I watched her, I could see the cracks in her perfect exterior. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. She didn't have the power she was used to wielding, and it was slowly driving her mad. I couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep this up. The walls were closing in on her. I had already spoken to local reporters who had shown a keen interest in the situation. With just one phone call, I could have the entire neighborhood exposed, and Karen's little empire would crumble. I had made sure to document every violation, every threat, and every move she made. The footage of her stealing the package was a powerful tool, and it was just the beginning. With a few more strategic moves, Karen's time and power would be over. As Karen spoke again, her voice faltered slightly, her composure slipping with each word. I could tell she was trying to regain control, but it wasn't working. Her typical tactics of intimidation and manipulation weren't having the same effect they once did. The truth was the neighborhood was waking up. No one was afraid of her anymore, and that terrified her. She had relied on fear and submission for far too long, but now the people she had tried to control were standing together. We weren't backing down. When she finally finished speaking, I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. There was something satisfying in watching her squirm, knowing she had no idea how deep she was about to fall. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of answering her demands. Instead, I simply stood there, allowing the weight of the moment to sink in. And then the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't Karen standing on the other side. It was the neighbors. Several of them, all gathering together in a show of solidarity. They had seen what had happened. They had come to support me. With them was a local news crew, eager to cover the story. They had all heard about Karen's reign of terror and had been waiting for the right moment to take action. Today was that moment. The small army of neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out was now ready to fight back, and Karen had no idea what she was walking into. The camera crew set up quickly, their equipment humming as they prepared to capture what would be the beginning of the end for Karen's HOA rule. The neighbors took their positions, and I could feel the tension in the air. Karen's face went white as she realized what was happening. She had walked into a trap she didn't even see coming. The weight of her actions, the many abuses of power, and the countless lives she had ruined were now going to be exposed for all to see. This wasn't just about a stolen package anymore. This was about the truth, and the truth was a powerful weapon. The cameras rolled as one by one. The neighbors stepped forward, recounting their experiences with Karen. It was as if a dam had burst. Each story added to the growing evidence of her corruption, her manipulation, and her utter disregard for the people she was supposed to be serving. The neighbors spoke with a strength that had been hidden for far too long, and as each person shared their tale, the truth became undeniable. Karen had no escape now. She couldn't hide behind her rules, her threats, or her false sense of superiority. The truth had a way of making everything else crumble. As the footage captured Karen's defeat, I felt a sense of justice in the air. The bees, once an unassuming part of my garden project, had become the catalyst for a much larger movement. In the end, Karen's reign was over, and the community was stronger for it. The neighborhood had come together, not just to reclaim power, but to stand for what was right. And with that, the quiet suburban streets that had once been ruled by fear would never be the same again. The aftermath of that fateful day hit with the force of a hurricane. It wasn't just Karen's downfall that echoed through the neighborhood. It was the transformation of a community that had once lived in fear, but now stood united in defiance. The media coverage that followed the story went viral, with reports flooding local and national outlets. Karen, once the feared HOA president, was now the subject of mockery, her manipulative tactics exposed for the world to see. She had no idea that the bees, those tiny creatures she had unknowingly unleashed, would be the tipping point in a battle she thought she had already won. With Karen's reign crumbling around her, her hold on the HOA board quickly disintegrated. The other board members, some of whom had quietly been complicit in her actions, began to distance themselves. One by one, they resigned, unable to withstand the pressure of the truth. The HOA meetings, which had once been tense and filled with fear, became a platform for open discussion. No longer were neighbors afraid to voice their concerns. Instead, they began to collaborate, sharing stories of the petty fines, unreasonable rules, and harassment they had endured under Karen's leadership. The local authorities, who had initially hesitated to get involved, couldn't ignore the overwhelming evidence any longer. Investigations were launched into Karen's financial dealings, uncovering more corruption and misconduct than anyone had imagined. It turned out that she had been using the HOA's funds for personal gain, funneling money into renovation projects at her own home and paying herself for community improvements that were nothing more than self-serving upgrades. The financial mismanagement was staggering, and the neighborhood began to understand just how deep the rot had gone. Sarah, my sister, had been a silent force in the background throughout this entire ordeal, but now, with the truth in the open, she took action. As governor, she used her position to push for new legislation to protect homeowners from HOA abuses. She spearheaded the creation of a law that would hold HOA presidents accountable, ensuring that they couldn't use their power to intimidate or control others. The law, aptly named the Right to Home Happiness Act, was passed in record time and became a beacon for communities across the state. But it wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about what came next, the rebuilding of the community brick by brick. The destroyed wheelchair ramp, once a symbol of Karen's cruelty, was rebuilt, not only to be functional, but to be a thing of beauty. Local artists volunteered their time to decorate it, transforming it into a vibrant piece of art. Flowers bloomed along the edges, and soft lights illuminated the ramp at night, making it a symbol of resilience. The neighbors who had once kept to themselves now gathered regularly, organizing events to support one another and strengthen their bonds. It was as if the very fabric of the community had been rewoven, and every thread felt stronger than before. The day Karen finally packed up her things and moved out of the neighborhood was almost surreal. The news vans were there, capturing the final moments of her departure. Neighbors stood outside, some of them waving goodbye, others silently watching as she drove away. Her house, which had once been the symbol of control and fear, now stood empty, its front yard devoid of the immaculate perfection that had made it so imposing. A new family moved in soon after, one with children and pets. They immediately put up a wheelchair ramp for their grandmother, and the neighbors, instead of criticizing it, pitched in to help with the installation. That simple act was the final marker of the change that had occurred in the community. No longer was there fear of judgment for simply being different. The neighborhood had become a place where everyone's needs were respected, where inclusivity was the norm. As time passed, more and more people came forward with their stories of how Karen's actions had affected their lives. One by one, her past victims began to find their voices, and the full extent of her reign of terror became apparent. Even those who had been too afraid to speak up now found solidarity in their shared experiences. The power had shifted. People who had once been isolated, fearful of retribution, were now emboldened by the truth. They formed a new, inclusive community that didn't just stand up for itself. It stood up for others, offering help and support in ways that had never been seen before. The final blow came when it was revealed that Karen had not only misused HOA funds, but had been involved in fraudulent activities at other properties she had managed in the past. News outlets covered the story, and her name became synonymous with corruption and abuse. But for the people who had lived through it all, the victory wasn't in the headlines or the legal battles. It was in the simple, everyday moments that came after. The neighborhood was no longer divided by fear and intimidation. People spoke to one another, shared meals, and helped each other out. The old ways of the HOA had been erased, replaced by a system that valued the well-being of the residents, not their submission to arbitrary rules. In the end, Karen's fall from grace didn't just mark the end of her reign. It marked the beginning of a new era for the community. A community where fairness, understanding, and kindness replaced judgment and control. The bee-filled box, the package she had stolen, had been the catalyst, but it wasn't just about bees anymore. It was about standing up to the forces that tried to divide us, standing up to the people who thought they could control us. And as I watched my neighbors come together to rebuild not just our homes, but our sense of unity, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. The story of the bees and everything that came after would be one that this neighborhood would never forget.